Left before Thanksgiving break, we had just started talking about the second Great Awakening. So I'm gonna go back a little bit and review a little bit what we were talking about, and also just to give you some information about the rest of the semester. Period 5, we'll try to get all the way through period 5, which goes up through the Civil War, actually through Reconstruction. So we really got to hustle to get through it all. And so we'll try to finish up this period all before holiday break. Okay, so when I last left you, we were talking about the Second Great Awakening, and what the Second Great Awakening is about is it's a religious fervor gets revived throughout the states in America. Okay, and there's a lot of contributing factors to that, and one of them was Charles Grandison Finney. Look at that guy. Whew. That's a face for radio. So, but his voice, his face may not be the most appealing, but his voice was fantastic. He was the greatest of the revival preachers. You guys know what a revival is?
Renewal?
A what?
Renewal?
Yeah, it is. But like you go to a revival, revivals became very popular during the Second Great Awakening. It's basically like a camp meeting where there might be 20,000 people show up under this tent to hear this guy preach, okay? And they're all there for one reason, for religious purposes, okay? Now, Finney himself was trained as a lawyer, but he abandoned the law to become an evangelist. An evangelist is a person who tries to use coercive, I don't want to say coercive, but try to convince you to dedicate your life to a religion. And but he was a great orator, great speaker, and was by far the best evangelist of the day. And he brought some changes to Protestantism, in that, like, he instituted this thing called the anxious bench. You guys ever heard of that? The anxious bench. Basically, people that wanted to
Madison McKinney, you need to report to Miss Wood's room. Madison McKinney, you need to report to Miss Wood's room.
But he devised this thing called the anxious bench. This is where really, like, if you were a sinner and you wanted to repent of your sins, you would sit in full view of the congregation and basically, like, speak and announce your sins. And once you said that, the congregation would kind of like forgive you. All right, and public prayer was a big thing. And it doesn't sound like all that big of a deal, but it is a big deal because women were allowed to do it too. And so that means that women could speak in public. They could have a camp meeting with 20,000 people there, and women being the focal point, speaking out loud. So that was a big thing, okay? He believes, among other, I'll talk about but during the Second Great Awakening, this was sweeping throughout America. He believed that there could be such a thing as a perfect Christian society, like perfection could be achieved. He believed that alcohol and slavery were evil. And, he really brings it helped to offer women an active role in bringing their husbands and families to religion, giving women a more important role within the family, within society. So the Second Great Awakening does a lot of things. It brings what the most important thing it does is it brings about reforms in things like the drinking of alcohol, slavery, women's rights, education, prison reform. So the Second Great Awakening is the catalyst that brings forth great change in American society. And it all has to do with religion. It all has to do with religion. You know, you hear, Thomas Jefferson making his statement, the separation of church and state. It's never really been the case in America. Okay? All right. Now, we talked last time about a lot of different churches that sprung out of this Second Great Awakening, or not necessarily sprung out, but gained a lot of converts. And that would be the Methodists and the Baptists. The Methodists and the Baptists, their congregations grew immensely as a result of the Second Great Awakening surging across the land. All right. And, I don't know how it is now, but basically, in order to join one of these churches, you had to have a personal conversion. Do you guys know what a personal conversion entails in a Methodist or Baptist church? Like if you wanted to join or be a member? How do you join? Huh? Okay, baptism is definitely a rite for many church organizations. Basically, you had to have what was called like an emotional experience. You had to feel something. Okay, this is contrary to the ways of the past. It's contrary to Calvinism, because Calvinism is all about predestination, and it's definitely contrary to Catholicism, because it's just like it doesn't matter what you feel; it's what you know, what you do. Okay, so but rousing emotionalism is a big part of the Second Great Awakening, and a lot of newer churches emerge out of this. And you see like Pentecostal, which is all about feeling and emotion. Okay, so other religions, like brand new religions, entirely spawn, like are just created out of nothing. Not nothing, but they're created during this period of time. One such person who creates a brand new religion is a man named Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith. And in 1830, Joseph Smith reports that he is visited by an angel. The name of that angel is Moroni. And that the angel Moroni shows Joseph Smith some golden plates that had been hidden by Jesus in upstate New York. What are you laughing for? And they're written in a language that is difficult to decipher. I think it was written in Egyptian hieroglyphics. And these golden plates could only be interpreted. There was no Rosetta Stone yet. Okay? And so these golden plates, Joseph Smith was given a special set of glasses by the angel Moroni, where he could look through the glasses and read the golden tablets. When he deciphered the golden tablets, he wrote it down and created a book called the Book of Mormon, which is just simply another testament of the New Testament. Another book of the New Testament. You get the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Book of Mormon. Okay? Now, when he constitutes the Book of Mormon, he begins a brand new faith. They're simply referred to now as Mormons, but that's actually not the name of the faith. What's the name of the faith? That's close. Very good. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter, Latter, not like ladder, but latter, as in later on, Latter-day Saints. And he launches this new faith. Now, they're more commonly referred to as simply Mormons. Mormons. Because of the name of the book that the angel Moroni gives to Joseph Smith to be a brand new testament of Jesus Christ. Okay. All right, so this is a brand new religion, totally 100% American, an American product, made in America by an American. But it's not really for American. It's destined to, to this day, Mormonism is a global religion. There are people all over the world that practice the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So Joseph Smith, he's going to be the person in charge, he establishes a religious oligarchy. What's an oligarchy?
Like a government ran by religion?
That would be a theocracy. It's really just a government by a few people. And yes, it is a theocracy. So he establishes his oligarchy. And he begins, what would you do if you were visited by an angel who you spent significant time with, who gave you some magical peeping stones and you just interpreted some golden tablets written in foreign language that were left there by Jesus? Would you want to keep it to yourself? Well, he didn't want to keep it to himself. All right? He wanted to spread the message. How do you think his message was met? Well, how do you think his message was received? Well, how do you think his message was received? Not well. Not well, okay? In fact, he received serious opposition from his non-Mormon neighbors. In fact, this opposition evolved into persecution. Opposition is one thing. Persecution is another. So he begins in New York. He gets ran out of New York. Then he goes into Pennsylvania, and he's ran out of there. And then in Ohio, he faces serious violence there. He keeps pushing westward and westward and westward and westward. Until eventually, let me pull my map down here. We're not quite to Utah yet. More stuff has to happen before we get to Utah. So, he was in upstate New York, okay, like up in here. And he makes his way all the way. The map's getting old. Okay. He begins to make his way westward with his people in tow, not by himself. He's got his Mormon followers with him, facing persecution all along the way, okay? Until, let's see, where does he go? All the way across Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, until he reaches the banks of the Mississippi River, okay? Now, when he gets to the banks of the Mississippi River, some things begin to happen, okay? Eventually, his sect of religion was pretty offensive to a lot of other Americans. Okay, your Baptists and your Methodists. It was pretty offensive, and for whatever reasons. And so, some of the beliefs of the Mormons of that time did a lot to further anger a lot of Americans. Like, they would pull all their votes together. They were a voting bloc. Like, if Joseph Smith told the Mormon people to vote a certain way, they did. Okay? So that was not very American, not very democratic in a lot of Americans' opinion. Also, Joseph Smith would openly, drill a militia. Like, they would march down streets with weapons and stuff.
So is this like a cult
I don't know. No, this is a world religion today.
today? Is this a back then cult?
I am not going to call it a cult. I'm going to call it a world religion.
That's cult behavior.
Isn't all religion?
No.
No?
Kinda, but that's highlighted cult.
Okay. Another thing that the Mormons practiced was the practice of polygamy. You guys know what polygamy is? What is polygamy?
Like you can marry multiple people.
Men could marry multiple women.
They still do that today, don't they?
Polygamy is illegal in the United States.
How come it's on TV?
Do you believe everything you see on TV?
Girl, I believe TLC.
The X-Files is on TV too. Okay? So, needless to say, the Mormons are meeting hostility everywhere they go. Hostility everywhere they go. And then in 1844, on the banks of the Mississippi River, in a place called, is actually up here, Carthage. Okay? In Carthage, things kind of come to a head for Joseph Smith. Because Joseph Smith and his brother were basically put in jail, and an angry mob stormed the jail and murdered him. They just murdered him. Like an angry mob stormed the jail and murdered him. Not only murdered him, they mangled him up, mangled his body. That's angry people. Because his God was different than theirs, I guess. I don't know. So it would seem as though the Mormon religion was about to collapse with their leader mangled and murdered by a mob. But the torch, he had established an oligarchy, so there were other leaders in the Mormon faith, and the torch was passed to a man by the name of Brigham Young. Brigham Young. Also known as the Mormon Moses. But his name is Brigham Young. Stern and austere, very much in contrast to Joseph Smith's charm and affability. He only had 11 days of formal schooling his entire life. 11 days. But he proved very quickly to be an effective and aggressive leader. A very eloquent preacher. A gifted administrator. He could put people in positions they needed to be in to get things done. And he's determined to not be put in prison and be murdered and mangled by a mob. So, he leads his oppressed Latter-day Saints over the vast rolling plains to Utah. All the way there. Not a short trek, mind you. In fact, they kind of do some trailblazing. The path that they take to get there is known as the Mormon Trail. Okay, so when they get there, this is like they had to cross the Rocky Mountains, and then they come across this desert, and then they reach this enormous body of water, bigger than any they had ever seen. And they reach down and they get a nice cool drink, and it's salt water. Can you imagine crossing a desert and you come across this enormous lake bigger than any you had ever seen. Look how, like, you can see it from your seats on the map. It is enormous. It's the Great Salt Lake. And it's called that because it's salt water. All right? So they had some pretty severe hardships on the way there. And when they get there, they have to make the desert bloom with salt water. So, but they do make the desert bloom with cooperative methods of irrigation. And this is a monument that's actually in Salt Lake City. It's called the Seagull Monument. Seagull Monument. What's missing in Salt Lake City? Well, around this area that would, you tend to have this kind of geography when you have seagulls. The sea. There's no sea here. Why is there seagulls in Utah? No, it's just a lake. Well, in 1848, there was a horde of crickets that came through their farmland, and a couple crickets, not a big deal. A massive horde of crickets is going to totally destroy your crops. All right, which could bring famine and problems for the entire community. So, as if by a miracle, as their crops were literally being devoured by these crickets, another horde came in, a horde of seagulls, and ate the crickets, which saved their crops.
How did seagulls make it all the way from
It's a miracle. Hence the statue of a seagull in Salt Lake City, the Seagull Monument. So, this area that they established in Utah grows remarkably. What is it?
How? I just don't get it.
It's a miracle. You don't believe in miracles? You don't have to. It happened. So, this semi-arid land of Utah grew pretty rapidly and remarkably. By the end of 1848, they had like 5,000 settlers arriving. I mean, there were people arriving there on foot, pushing wheelbarrows that they had pushed, like, from Pennsylvania. Imagine pushing a wheelbarrow from Pennsylvania to Utah. 1,300 miles. It's crazy, okay? So very dedicated people. And under the rugged discipline of Brigham Young, the community became a prosperous frontier theocracy. Brigham Young married 27 women and begat 56 children. You guys ever heard of a football player who used to play for the 49ers named Steve Young? Yeah? It's Brigham Young's great-grandson. He went to Brigham Young University in Utah. Imagine going to the school named after your grandpa, great-grandpa. That'd be kind of cool. All right, so needless to say, the population swelled by a lot with all this marriage going on, not to mention thousands of immigrants coming in from Europe, where the Mormons had sent missionaries. Brigham Young sent people to Europe to recruit followers, and it was working. People were coming to the semi-arid desert of Utah by the thousands.
Did they take the back way? Like that way?
The back way?
California way?
No, if they're coming from Europe, they came probably through the Hudson, up the Hudson River, through the Great Lakes, because they've got the Erie Canal now, and ended up in Chicago, and then they could take a ferry down the Mississippi, and then go from the Mississippi River over on the Mormon Trail, as you can see here. All right, not an easy journey. Not an easy journey today. It's still a long plane flight. Okay, but the Mormons became a very important and influential people. To this day, a significant portion of Utah is still is part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Okay? Questions on the Mormons? Cool. All right. Next, now we talked about how the Second Great Awakening brings about a lot of reforms. Let's talk about the reforms. So the first one we'll talk about is education reforms. Where do schools get their money today? Taxes. The tax of citizens. Tax-supported schools were very scarce in the early years of America. Very few places had government-sanctioned tax-supported schools. So it became pretty apparent, some people were advocating for a free public education. That's what you guys get now, a free public education. A lot of people, were stiffly opposed to that. But, well-to-do conservative Americans gradually began to see the light. They were the ones that did not want to see a public education. If they did not pay to educate other folks' brats, the brats might grow up and be an ignorant, dangerous rabble who are going to be able to vote anyway, whether they're educated or not. So taxation for education was basically seen as like an insurance premium that the wealthy paid for stability and democracy. That's how they sold it to them. So tax-supported schools were built more rapidly in the North than in the South. The South was, slavery cursed, and it saw little need and necessity for public education. But, this is where you begin to see the famed one-room schoolhouses. You ever heard of that, the one-room schoolhouse? You ever heard of it? Yeah. One room, one stove.
Is the American Temperance Union the same as the
Society of... Is that...
It's chapter 16. It says American Temperance Society, but the definitions up front says union.
Sure. Okay. All right. So, one room, one school, one teacher, all the grades. You'd be 10th grade, kindergarten, one room. Okay. So, often usually just 8 grades were in a one-room schoolhouse. But teachers, schools only operated a few months a year. School teachers, most of them in this era were men. And early on in the days of tax-supported schools, many of these men were often ill-trained, ill-tempered, and ill-paid. My, how things have changed. These men typically put more stress on discipline than learning. They called it licking. Like you're going to get a hickory switch, a licking, than the learning. All right? So they usually only taught the 3 R's. What's the 3 R's? No. Reading, writing, and arithmetic.
What's your 3 R's? I see where she was going.
Reading, writing, arithmetic. That's the 3 R's. That's obviously it's really just 1 R because it's writing with a W and arithmetic. But that's typically what was taught in these early schools. So needless to say, reform was needed. Changes were needed. In stepped a man by the name of Horace Mann. Horace Mann, a brilliant and idealistic graduate of Brown University. he campaigned effectively in the state of Massachusetts for better schoolhouses, longer school terms, higher pay for teachers, and an expanded curriculum, meaning you don't just get the 3 R's. Now, you got to keep in mind, this is at a time when education was seen as an expensive luxury, not something like it is today that you have to do. If you don't do it, your parents get in trouble. You have to come to school. This was, a lot of people didn't want to pay for it. They didn't want to have education. And, a majority of our population was illiterate. Most people couldn't read. Can you imagine that?
How did they vote they couldn't read?
That's a good question.
Please guess.
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe they could figure it out.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Maybe they just knew that person. And
Maybe they like color coded it or something.
Maybe. Or maybe they had someone in the booth with them that could read it to them. All right. Okay, so one of the things that helps education advance is better textbooks. And a guy by the name of Noah Webster, you ever heard of him? Webster's Dictionary. He had been known as the schoolmaster of the Republic. He devoted 20 years to creating a book to standardize the American language. And he does so with a dictionary.
Do you think he ever just got tired of it, like made up words?
We make up words all the time. The dictionary is updated every year. I remember when the verb Google went into the dictionary. Like, I'm going to Google something.
Yeah.
Before, like Google, a Google was like a number, and it was spelled differently. It's like it was like a 10 with 100 zeros or something. I don't know. I don't know. But that's what it meant. But Noah Webster takes 20 years and creates a dictionary, which he published in 1828, which helps to standardize the American language.
I wonder how small it was when it was first made.
It was pretty good size. Pretty good size book. It's still, it took him 20 years.
Yeah.
Other influential people, William McGuffey. You ever heard of a McGuffey reader? You guys might be too young. Never heard of a McGuffey reader? Kind of a thing of the past. He's a teacher-preacher of rare power. Teacher and a preacher. And he made these grade school readers that sold like 122 million copies, which hammered home lessons in morality, patriotism, and idealism. These would be like little tiny books with stories that were age appropriate. That you guys know the Bernstein Bears, and it's children's books. And each one of these books had a moral to the story, almost like Aesop's fables. Okay, I used to have some McGuffey readers. Okay. And this is all for primary school, okay? Higher education was something entirely different. We know about higher education. Can you guys name some institutions in America that have existed since, the early years of America? And even Harvard has been around. Anything else? Okay, UVA actually is founded just before this time. Founded by Thomas Jefferson. 1819. So that's good. The University of North Carolina, UVA. Oberlin College. You ever heard of Oberlin? Oberlin. All right, I'll tell you about. So first off, UVA, largely the brainchild of Thomas Jefferson, who designed its beautiful architecture, and at times even watched its construction from his home through a telescope at Monticello. The first state-supported universities in the South were UVA and UNC, the one in Chapel Hill. Chapel Hill's UNC is actually older, 1795. So even before Jefferson's presidency, UNC was being built. So the federal government was nourishing the growth of state institutions of higher learning by helping to pay for the construction of some of these. Now, Oberlin College is different because it was intended for women. Women's higher education was largely frowned upon in the United States. A woman's place was believed to be in the home. And training in needlecraft seemed way more important than algebra to many Americans of this time period. So prejudices prevented a lot of women from education. In fact, many Americans believed that too much learning would injure the fragile female brain.
So, like, they just wouldn't get into the college, or they would get into the college and they'd walk in and their professor would decline to teach them?
Well, they would not be allowed to apply.
Oh.
Yeah. Not only was too much learning harmful to the fragile female, I don't believe this. I'm just telling you what the common ideas were. I think you ladies are smarter than I will ever be. So too much learning, it was believed, would cause harm to the fragile female brain. They believed it would undermine a woman's health. It could make them unhealthy and render them unfit for marriage.
Because they were smarter than me.
Not allowed to be smarter than men.
But they didn't really even have to go to school to be smarter than me. They were just
Susan B. Anthony's teacher, she's a future feminist, even refused to teach her how to do long division. Sorry, Susan, I don't want to hurt you. Can you imagine this? How ridiculous? Ladies, like, things have come a long way. Like, this was not that long ago, okay? So, women's schools at the secondary level took a little while. But Oberlin College in New York, in Ohio, opened its doors to women and men. And yeah, they welcomed African Americans, everybody.
So it's like one of the first co-ed schools?
It was, absolutely, Oberlin in Ohio. It's still there. You can still go to school there. Okay. All right. So education gets some boosts from the government. Other reforms were made in prisons and insane asylums. Huh? That's not good?
It is good.
It's good if you're a prisoner or an insane person.
No, but didn't they like use torture the crap out of all of us?
Torture,
That's kind of why they were made. To stop it.
okay, so as our young republic was still growing, campaign reforms also reached our prisons, touched by the fire of evangelical religion through the pews and pulpits of American churches. Optimistic promises of the Second Great Awakening inspired a lot of people to do battle against earthly evils. One of the reforms made was debtors' prisons. Imprisonment for being in debt and not being able to pay it. That was a nightmare for a lot of Americans. Even as late as the 1830s, there were hundreds of penniless people languishing in filthy holes of prisons, sometimes for owing less than $1. Less than $1. So, obviously, poor people are going to be hit harder with debtors' prisons than wealthier people. So, debtors' prisons are largely done away with in this time. Is it time to go? Godspeed.